Good afternoon and welcome to our GATE Equity Webinar 201, our afternoon series. GATE Equity Webinar 201, Substance Use in Student Athletes. At OSPI, we envision all students prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagements. We also have a YouTube channel that we're really excited about. If you want great ideas from Washington schools, you should definitely subscribe. I'm Bonnie Zimmerman, Program Specialist at OSPI with the System and School Improvement Department. We're joined by Mandy Paradise, Intervention Prevention Program Supervisor here at OSPI, and Jason Kilmer, University of Washington, Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Washington School of Medicine. I thank you both for joining us. Our objectives are to understand high leverage substance abuse and prevention issues, get innovative ideas for connecting with families and communities, and we hope to provide resources to get you started. OSPI has developed an equity statement that we think helps frame our webinars. We believe each student, family, and community possesses strengths and cultural knowledge that benefit their peers, educators, and schools. This is brought to you by the Office of System and School Improvement, where we believe we are more likely to see school improvement across multiple measures if we study, support, serve, and elevate. And next month, our webinars we'll talk about ninth grade success and early warning systems. Please share this link with friends who may be interested. And right now we want to get a sense of who's in the audience. If you want to take our poll and let us know what your role is.
Hey everyone, we're noticing your responses coming in. We see that there are a fair amount of school counselors or behavioral health counselors on the phone, teacher and paraprofessionals, you're also in the lead. We have a few community-based organizations, some continuous improvement partners and coaches, as well as athletic coaches and athletic directors. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, hi everyone. This is Mandy Paradise, OSPI with the Prevention Intervention Services Program, and I'm here to give us a little bit of framing today before we hear from Dr. Kilmer. The question is, so why sports? And I'd like to start by saying because they're an incredibly meaningful part of many students' lives. They offer so many positives, and we will talk about this more moving ahead. But our lens today is more than just sports or athletics. It's also about adolescent substance use and the need for intervention and prevention in the athletic realm. So when we look at our Healthy Youth Survey data, we see that there's a significant amount of Washington students engaged in after-school activities, including sports, at least one day a week. And because we know that sports and other activities are meaningful and engaging for youth, this means that some of our students are getting good exposure to positive resources and experiences, which in turn leads to a higher likelihood of positive development. A well-established way we can increase positive experiences and positive development is by increasing protective factors for students. So what you see on your slide right now are the various protective factors. There's more than this, but this is just a snapshot. We've got things like high self-esteem, developing good coping skills, psychological safety, positive norms, meaningful engagement with school, clear and positive expectations for behavior, and having two or more close connections with peers, school, athletics, employment, religion, or culture. So there's a lot of things here that count as protective factors. Sports and athletics offer many protective factors, and we're going to keep talking about that today. The more we reduce risk factors and increase these protective factors, the more likely we will prevent substance abuse among youth and help improve overall life experiences. Bolstering student protective factors means that we as adults have to focus on our actions and on our systems, especially when it comes to high stigma, high risk, and high consequence behaviors like substance abuse. Unfortunately, it's a little too easy for adult reactions and systems to align more with the risk factors than the protective factors. When I say risk factors, I mean things like lack of warmth, hostility, harsh discipline, rejection and neglect, and lack of adult supervision. These things actually put students at further risk. Intramural sports and athletics, especially in high school, gives us a strong opportunity to strengthen protective factors and really maximize self-esteem building, meaningful engagement, psychological safety, problem solving, and other pro-social skills. Looking at athletics and sports in particular, we know that there are many positives to participation. Not only can participation reinforce protective factors, but school-related positive outcomes also include improvement in things like school grades, coursework selection, homework, educational and occupational goals, self-esteem, college enrollment, and educational attainment. We also know that participating in sports leads to an increase of physical activity among youth, which in turn improves overall health and development. Furthermore, when comparing intramural sports to community sports, studies show that school-based sports offer the most benefit for youth in terms of academic indicators. When it comes to sports participation and substance use, here's what we are noticing. In a major literature review that looked at the relationship between sports participation and alcohol and drug use among adolescents, some interesting findings came up. Sports participation is often related to reduced illicit drug use and reduced marijuana use, meaning that when students engage in sports, use of marijuana and other drugs decreases. However, the same lit review also indicated that sports participation is positively associated with alcohol use, with 82% of the included studies showing a significant positive relationship. This means that when students engage in sports, alcohol use increased. Additionally, other studies have confirmed that adolescent sports participation can put youth at an increased risk for use of alcohol. This information prompts us to pause. It prompts us to strongly consider high school athletics as a critical period to reduce or prevent the use of drugs, and implies special attention can be paid for addressing alcohol among student athletes. The takeaway here is that the students who participate in sports may have unique needs when it comes to substance use prevention and intervention. And today we'll hear more about this with Dr. Jason Kilmer. But before that, we're going to look at some other big picture concepts. 3 things that we can explore when it comes to substance use prevention and intervention include stigma, stereotypes, and supports. When we're talking about stigma, we just want to reinforce it's okay to discuss drugs and alcohol with youth, especially in the context of athletics. In fact, as Jason will talk about, it's really important to discuss because of the unique situations student athletes may experience. There's generally an honor code or athletic code that addresses substance violations with penalties. We can trace this back to overall zero tolerance concepts that came out during the 1980s and the war on drugs. And this kind of harkens back to policies established at the federal level related to anti-drug acts. We still see the residuals of the zero tolerance approach in schools and in sports. But since the 1980s, science has come a long way. And we know that exclusionary practices do not help school climate, academics, or engagement. Research shows that sports participation overwhelmingly offers protective factors for students, giving a sense of belonging, increasing self-esteem, and connectedness. We also know that coaches are often a positive adult in the lives of youth, which is another strong protective factor. With so many positives, excluding students from sports or teams due to violating substance policies deserves a second look. Substance use violations deserve a reassessment, one free from stigma. While schools and athletic programs don't want to promote a climate of drug use, there's also a balance to be had for students who are known to be vulnerable due to using or experimenting with drugs and alcohol. Excluding students from sports may exacerbate their risk and vulnerability. Excluding them can lead to the exact opposite outcomes we're trying to achieve. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about stereotypes. We need to acknowledge that just because a student seems to have it all together, is playing sports, and is steadily achieving goals, doesn't mean that the student is not also struggling with substance use or might find themselves in sticky situations. It's really time for us to evaluate our perceptions, and adults can reframe who we think might be at risk for substance use and thus who might need added supports or services. If we know that students participating in sports may be at an increased risk for alcohol use, we can plan targeted prevention efforts and interventions. We can also work to blend prevention and intervention into the overall culture of our athletic programs and team settings. This is a great place to access your student assistance professionals and their expertise in this area. Big thing focus is the supports. So let's encourage students in all settings to engage in meaningful conversations about drugs and alcohol. Moving beyond just saying no or talking about consequences, and really giving students what they need to navigate healthy decision making. Reinforcing school-based supports can look like school-wide prevention initiatives, social norm campaigns, and hosting prevention club activities. It can look like inviting your school's student assistance professional or prevention specialist to regularly meet with the athletic teams and collaborate in building their team cultures. It could also look like supporting all students to seek and engage in treatment or supports for alcohol, tobacco, vaping, and other drug use. Reconsidering how our rules may punish youth or actually deter them from seeking help is a pretty big priority. If students know they will be excluded from their team, they will probably not seek help or trust accessing services around them for fear of being punished. The final slide in this introductory portion provides a few high-leverage support examples spanning from universal to personalized. Focusing efforts on what works in prevention is key. Research tells us that some of the most common prevention activities are some of the most ineffective. To know which practices will get the best results, we've actually included a link in the to the document, What Works in Prevention, and that's on our next slide. The What Works in Prevention document breaks down the exact activities that schools could prioritize with students to instill the most protection against substance abuse. Another universal approach is to review and revise exclusionary policies and to look at the specific consequences in athletic programs. Are the consequences of violating substance use policies further pushing students away from support? Are they restorative? Are they punitive? Examining policies to see how they impact students is an important move. After all, sports offers so many positives. It seems most valuable if students can continue to benefit from the protective factors that athletics and other activities offer as they work towards wellness or recovery. Moving on to targeted supports, research clearly states that having a well-trained staff is one of the best practices. Professional development specific to substance use prevention and intervention can help adults understand their own stigma and values, and in turn helps maximize prevention efforts. Training gives teachers and coaches an opportunity to get their questions answered, to build their mastery and confidence on sensitive subject matter, and gives a venue to practice content delivery. Another targeted support is having a student assistance program in your school. Student assistance programs are a tier 2 support that offers interventions for students. The program places caring trained adults in buildings to support students when they need it the most. The professionals come with expertise in youth development and substance use prevention, and the goal of the program is to serve students identified in need of help due to substance use. Among all the services that they provide, things like skill building groups, school-wide campaigns, one-on-one supports, they're really there to help the school as well as the student. Last thing that we'll cover for the introductory portion is the personalized supports. So these are things like tier 3, case management and re-engagement. The types of support to help warmly welcome students back into their activities or school, and also support ongoing recovery and well-being while engaged in school or athletics. A student shouldn't have to give up athletics to engage in recovery or receive supports. Treatment is the most obvious tier 3 or personalized support, and this may be substance use or mental health or both. And partnering with local community providers is the main way schools can build this high leverage support in. So this is the link to the What Works in Prevention resource, and this is something we can send out as well. We highly recommend it, and to hear a little bit more about this, you could check out our earlier GATE webinar that will be archived for the month of October. Today's guest speaker is Dr. Jason Kilmer. He received his PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Washington. He currently works at the University of Washington as an associate professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences. I need you to know that I'm a huge fan of Dr. Kilmer and that he's a force in the prevention field. Most recently, he's been showcased as a content expert in 2 major substance use prevention campaigns at the state level. Though he may not be a household name just yet, he soon will be once the Washington State You Can, Marijuana Can't, and the Not a Moment Wasted campaigns get into full swing. You'll find him in several Ask the Expert videos coming to high schools and college classrooms near you. Jason works tirelessly to promote prevention and intervention. He's written numerous publications on the impact of college and student substance use. So we are delighted to have you join us, Jason. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my goodness, what a nice introduction. Great, I'm going to dive right into this. I just want to say a quick word about the fact that, first of all, you've got tremendous expertise there on high school students, middle school students. My work is with college students. And on top of the fact that I work with all the intercollegiate athletics, student athlete teams at the University of Washington, a portion of my salary is even paid for by the NCAA, where we look at how we can bridge the gap between science and practice with our student athletes on college campuses. As best as possible, I tried to find literature unique to high school students. But there's a little bit of an asterisk by a lot of what I'm going to say, which is that so much of the research has tended to be with 18, 19, 20 and older. But especially for those of you working with, for example, high school juniors or seniors who do have hopes of continuing to play beyond high school, there's always an opportunity to look at ways in which some of this research could extend. One of the things we do with the NCAA, and I'm going to come full circle to this, the NCAA had said, we want to make sure that our Division III schools, as well as NASPA small colleges, have some of the best science in their hands. And I want to make sure that you see this 360proof.org website, largely because if you have coaches that say, I really do want to get a sense of how I can be most useful, while this is a website that's meant for college campuses, I help to write the content for some very small modules on how coaches can talk with their student athletes about things like substance use. So I wanted to let you know that when we look, but I wanted to show you that the literature with intercollegiate athletes, once they're at the college level, rates of heavy episodic or binge drinking among athletes do tend to be higher than non-athletes. And when we look at binge drinking, depending on the study, it varies in its definition. Sometimes it's 5 drinks in a row for men, 4 drinks in a row for women, but it really is that drinking and getting drunk. We know that rates of abstinence can more than double during the season in which a student athlete competes. So off season can become quite an issue. When you've got high school students that are multiple sport athletes, obviously they may be in season quite a lot of the time. That can be a protective factor, and I'll talk about that a bit. What we find on college campuses, though, is that binge drinking and alcohol-related consequences are higher for team sport athletes than individual sport athletes. We know, and the state's doing a lot about correcting misperceived norms of drinking. When people think, well, everyone does this or everyone does that, that's associated with actual drinking for student athletes. So there are many opportunities to correct misperceived norms, and I know that depending on what school you're at, that may actually be happening within your school or your district or even the level of the ESD. What we know on college campuses, though, too, is that there are motives related to drinking that include sport-related positive reinforcement. I just got a personal best, we beat a rival, we won our division, things like this, as well as sports-related coping. And that can include injuries that really derail someone, things like this. As we look at increasingly diverse student bodies on our college campuses, we know that student athletes of color that are saying, when I drink, it's to cope, and I want to fit in with my teammates or with my classmates, they report actually the highest levels of alcohol-related problems among all student athletes. So it's important to realize that while this is a group that may have some tremendous opportunities at the level of college, they're also a high-risk group, and we want to be mindful of that. What's interesting is when you look at what I just presented, some of this hangs with what we see even with high school students. I was lucky enough to be third author of one of the 5 contributors to this manuscript. We found that peak blood alcohol concentration, weekly drinking, and alcohol-related problems were in fact lower among athletes in individual sports compared to other groups when they were in high school. So you saw on the previous slide that among college athletes, team sport tend to drink more than individual. We see that in high school too. Athletes competing in both team and individual sports had greater lifetime tobacco use and combined alcohol and tobacco use compared to individual or team sport alone. So we do see that the research that's been done, the limited research that's been done with high school athletes, so far at least does seem to hang with what we find among college campuses. I had to reach out to the authors that were involved in this today, and I was delighted that one of my friends and colleagues got this in my hands. There's a measure, the athlete drinking scale, that's used on college campuses, and this study tested it with high school students. And they looked at positive reinforcement, hooray, we won, team or group, I'm trying to fit in with my teammates, or sports-related coping. What they found was that positive reinforcement motive subscale was the only subscale significantly associated with drinking and problems, even when you control for everything else. So what do we know on college campuses? That positive reinforcement after a big win, that's a high-risk window. We see the same thing hold with high school athletes. So I show you all of that, both with the asterisk that some of the research with intercollegiate athletes is, of course, with 18 to 23-year-olds. And there are some direct connections we can make with what we see on high school campuses. When I met with Mandy to talk about how this could best meet the needs of folks on this webinar, I thought I'd talk a bit about substances and sleep, alcohol and athletic performance, marijuana and student athletes, and then, if time permitted, your questions. Starting with substances and sleep, this link will be in your handouts. I love this article for a range of reasons. Not only is it really, really digestible, but as you can see in the link, it's only 9 pages long, which meets my criteria for a good article. So often people will send me stuff that's like 50 pages long, and they're like, hey, Jace, you should read this. And I'm like, you should read this. But this nice, succinct article summarizes for us that when you look at the concept of how we sleep off a buzz, we know that there are 4 things that affect how alcohol gets into the body. What you're drinking, hard alcohol gets absorbed faster than wine, which gets absorbed faster than beer. How quickly you drink it. The more someone drinks in a slow, deliberate way, the more it slows the rate of absorption. How bubbly a drink is. Hard seltzers absolutely get absorbed faster than something that's flatter. Same with champagne. And if you eat prior to or while drinking. While there are 4 things that affect absorption, nothing we do affects the rate of oxidation. When people say I have awesome metabolism, cool. That's a different issue. This is a liver enzyme that it takes account the rate of how we sober up. and people burn off 0.016% off their blood alcohol level per hour. Students will try coffee, cold showers, exercise, water, bread, throwing up. None of these things have an impact on the rate of sobering up. What that means is if you know someone's at a 0.08 at midnight, 5 in the morning till they have a 0 on a breathalyzer. 0.16 at midnight, 10 a.m. before they blow a 0 on a breathalyzer. 0.24 at midnight, they blacked out. They're not blowing a 0 till 3 the next day. Obviously, this has implications for driving the next day, class the next day, practice the next day. And certainly if it was Friday night drinking and they have a Saturday game, you have to be mindful of things like this. But when people say, all I did was go to bed, what makes sleep what it is has very little to do with how long we lie there with our eyes closed, and everything to do with the brain's ability to go through different stages of sleep. REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, is where we do our dreaming. The other stages are non-REM, and probably the most well-known is stage 4 or deep sleep. Sleep experts have made clear REM is overrated. It's not that more REM is better. It's that if you want a perfect night's sleep, it should look at like what's on your screen right now. Start with a chunk of deep, a little bit in REM, a little less in deep, a little more in REM. Now none in deep, more in REM, and so on. If we go to bed after drinking, we'll fall asleep faster. It's a depressant. It depresses or slows down the central nervous system. But we can ask people, on nights where you've been drinking, what do you notice about your sleep? Tell me about your dreaming. And people are like, whoa, how'd you know? I don't dream at all. Or if I do dream, it's crazy vividly right before I wake up. Here's why. Go to bed with a positive blood alcohol level and stay at a positive blood alcohol level the whole night. The brain waves needed to kick into REM don't happen. That will account for a person's subjective impression that they didn't dream at all. It's because they genuinely did not enter REM sleep. If they succeed in sobering up, they go no REM, no REM, no REM, no REM, finally hit a 0. Now they go through an acute REM rebound, spend too much time in REM, not enough time in the other stages of sleep, and that can account for the vivid, weird dreams people might report. Who cares? What's the impact of a night of REM-deprived sleep? The next day you see increases in sleepiness, anxiety, irritability, and jumpiness. If someone drinks 2 nights in a row, this is additive. This is cumulative. Take a night off, the body plays catch up. A person goes through REM rebound, typically has difficulty both falling and staying asleep once they're asleep too much time in REM, and they report problems with fatigue the next day. Rarely do you meet the college student that says, wow, I'm super caught up on my sleep and I have no anxiety. I can imagine those of you that work with kids in secondary schools are probably also hearing that they deal with stress, anxiety, and are tired a lot. Are these athletes? Yes. But are they students first and foremost? Absolutely. And what we find on college campuses is when we ask people what gets in the way of doing well in school, they don't say partying. They say being stressed, tired, and having anxiety. All 3 of those things can be made worse by nighttime drinking. They can be flat out caused by people drinking at night. A lot of times students will be a little anxious about talking about substance use, but they're super excited about talking about sleep because they say, I'm tired a lot, I want to get caught up on sleep. With marijuana, thanks to Angarita and colleagues, we now know what marijuana does. Stage 4 or deep sleep gets extended, plus there's no REM. And just like with alcohol, you see next day increases in sleepiness, anxiety, irritability, and jumpiness.
One question was earlier when you shared the paper that you were a co-author on, can you translate that into plain English? What was the big takeaway from that?
Big takeaway on that is the people that are in individual sports, so individually focused sports, where, yes, you're part of a team, but you're not on the court or field or with your own teammates. Tennis, I might go my entire career and never have someone next to me. Whereas in basketball, I got 4 other people on the court. In football, got 10 other people with me. The individually focused sport folks tend to actually report less drinking, less consequences, lower BACs than the people that are in team sports. Even if you've got a person that's involved in team and individual, that puts them at higher risk than the folks that are in individual only. So being a student athlete can be really protective on a number of things. And it gives you everything from a community to be a part of. If you've got a good relationship with a coach, you've got someone who's literally rooting for you and can be very influential. But they also do tend to be higher risk groups of people, and especially when it comes to substance use.
Thanks so much, Jason.
No problem. Alcohol and athletic performance. When I get asked by D1 coaches across the country, hey, can you show me what the research says about alcohol and athletic performance with college athletes? I really can't, because A, you don't tend to see that research done since 18, 19, and 20-year-olds are minors, and therefore giving them alcohol is illegal. And 2, You don't see a lot of programs across the country willing to randomly assign half their student athletes to drink in the off chance it blows their entire season. So what do? We look outside of the United States. I always say I defer to strength and conditioning coaches on things like this. But the truth is, if you look at concentric, eccentric, and isometric contractions, concentric contraction, long story short, raising a weight during a bicep curl. When you lower that, eccentric. Isometric is carrying an object in front of you. It's when the muscle is activated but remains at constant length. In Australia, they said we can ethically introduce alcohol post-rugby because in rugby, there was enough of a culture and climate surrounding drinking after a match that it wasn't outside of the realm of what people might do anyway. They looked at a sample of men just shy of 20 years of age. So for me, working with college students, it's not a leap at all. If you're working with an 18-year-old senior, probably not a huge leap either. And they looked at rugby players in Australia. Immediately after a match, they had them eat a standard meal. Then they were randomly assigned such that half of them were given a big deal of orange juice and they said, drink it. The other group got a screwdriver, orange juice with vodka. They said, we want to measure what happens in terms of recovery, 16 hours. Those of you that have conducted research realize what a big deal that is. If someone fills out a 15-minute survey, we have to pay them. If they fill out a 30-minute survey, we have to pay them double. So when you're asking someone, give me 16 hours of your time so I can monitor you, that's one heck of a commitment. They had them engage in counter movement jump tests to measure lower body power. And they wanted to look at power 16 hours later as a function of people drank or didn't drink. Peak 16 hours post-match, the group that didn't drink improved 10.5%. The group that drank only improved 2.3%. I'm a numbers guy. These are compelling numbers. If a team actively says, we want to win state this year, we have these huge goals, then if they also decide as a team, no one on this team is going anywhere near alcohol, the science would support that. They found that the group that drank had reduced decision-making speed. Do I cut left? Do I cut right? Do I throw or not? And reduced quality of responses to visual stimuli. They said for any competitive athlete that wants to maximize recovery and enhance performance, alcohol should be avoided completely within 16 hours after a competition or competitive practice, regardless of the use of other recovery modalities. Why only 16 hours? That's all they could afford. Turns out, New Zealand said, what up, Australia? We got money. And they said, we want to test this for a full day and a half. I fully realize too that when I work with athletes, so many of them, not only are there team rules, if they're under 21, it's illegal, and there are NCAA guidelines. So fully realize that we do know, though, and Healthy Youth Survey shows this, that we do see kids in our state report that they drink. So part of what we're trying to do is for a motivated athlete, provide the evidence that would result in them saying, I'm going to choose to not drink for a range of reasons. And so we try and get a sense of what's important to them. If it's doing well in school, if it's doing well on the court or field of play, we look at that. This New Zealand study looked at a sample of men, had them perform 300 maximal eccentric contractions of the quads. Reading that sentence out loud hurts me to say it. But they had the same thing where they had them, half of them drink, half of them get just orange juice. They said, here's the deal. If you have a super intense workout, you're going to see losses during recovery. But they wanted to look at decreases in peak strength a full day and a half later as a function of what people consumed. What they find? Isometric contractions, the group that didn't drink, 12% off peak. Alcohol, 34. Concentric, 28 to 40. Eccentric, 19 to 34. My goodness, that is huge. And as a guy that's a fan of research and stats, what this means is if someone says doing well in my field of play matters to me, the science would support choosing them to abstain outright.
Jason, that's some really impressive data. That's big.
Thank you. Well, I got to say, it took a lot of digging to find this. And I sent it to Matt Martins, my buddy at the University of Missouri, because he's a sports psychologist. And I'm like, man, I don't want to put too much weight on this, but these aren't even in U.S. journals. And I feel like this tells one heck of a story. And he jokingly said to me, not only is this a heck of a find, he said, don't show it to your competition. Because, obviously in the name of science, we try and get stuff out there. But this is huge. Their conclusion was participants in sports containing intense eccentric muscular work, which is pretty much, unless there's a sport I'm not thinking of, every WIAA sport should be encouraged to not drink if optimal recovery is required. And if they make the choice to drink, they need to know that it magnifies exercise-induced muscle damage and related decrements in muscular performance. Kids have a lot on their plate. And if they say, I put X amount of time into training and practice, sadly, that can be undone if they make the choice to use. Barnes did a study that looked in male athletes and showed that drinking post-competition reduced production of testosterone, which had subsequent effects on protein synthesis and muscular regeneration. What does that mean in normal terms? That, again, muscle development, time spent in the weight room was compromised. I realize this is men only, but when I have a chance to present to male athletes, this is absolutely something I make sure that they know. We say in general that when you look at alcohol, it's made up of empty calories. And so when we try and look at the impact on weight gain, we're always very, very, very careful not to feed into if people have body image issues or any concerns about that. But, if someone says I drink 40 beers a week, that's 6,000 calories a week coming from alcohol. And that is not funny math. The average beer, 150 calories, 40 times 150, there's your 6,000. So it can undo so much time spent in the training room. The NCAA's Sports Science Institute points out that as a diuretic, alcohol can actually be one of the things that's a risk for dehydration and therefore losing playing time if you're cramping and having to come out. Dizziness, nausea, diarrhea, cramping. The Sports Science Institute says for a competitive athlete who drinks, they would want to match every alcoholic drink with a glass of water on top of their regular hydration regimen. You saw me talk about sleep, interferes with REM, causes REM rebound the next night. Cardiovascular effects could weaken heart, raise blood pressure, and if a person's coming back from injury, could slow down recovery, and trainers need to be careful about making sure people are aware of medications in case there's any potential interactions. Marijuana in student athletes. I know this is a lot, but when I looked at what to cut, I was like, I don't even know what to cut. I feel like this is such a treat to get to present to folks that work in the K-12 setting. I'm married to a 6th grade teacher. My dad taught for 50 years, as well as coached in Port Angeles. We saw just last week, former Seattle Seahawk Percy Harvin said he was high during every NFL game to manage anxiety. Some people say, wow, he had a kickoff return for a touchdown in the Super Bowl. Other people point out his career was absolutely shortened and literally assaulted teammates. I was in New England when Rob Gronkowski had a big announcement. Everybody thought he was going to come out of retirement. What did he do instead? Say he was going to start his own CBD line. And he said, for the first time in 10 years, I'm not in pain. Researchers who like to look at confounds are quick to point out that maybe he's not in pain because for the first time in 10 years, he's not getting tackled and hit by 300-pound people. But our high school kids are seeing this stuff. Our high school kids are hearing this stuff. I drive by 14 marijuana billboards on my way home. So the claims that are being made, we need to be mindful of this. One thing we need to do as a field is catch up on what people are using, since potencies at never before seen rates. I hear so many kids say, well, my parents said they used and they turned out fine. Their parents use different stuff. When you look at what the brain controls and you look at what THC as the most well-studied cannabinoid in cannabis, where it binds, it's all over the place. Why is that so important to be mindful of? Because THC has changed dramatically. This article came out at the end of 2016, and along with Nora Volkov's 2014 article, lets us estimate THC potency. When you hear about people in the 70s that, in quotes, smoked grass, it's because they were practically smoking grass. It was 1.5% THC. In the 80s, 2 to 3% THC. By 95, we hit 4%. By 2001, 6%. By 2006, 8%. And we've been double digits as a country since 2010. This is our state's second ever marijuana impact report. Came out August 2017. It showed that in 2016, the average potency in the US was a never before seen 13.18%. Never before seen until you come to our state. The average available for sale in Seattle is a literally untested 21.62%. If someone said for $10 million, what does the science say about Washington weed in the human brain? First, good job for having $10 million. And second, we do not know. We don't know what this does to people. When those students at Central got hospitalized for alcohol poisoning with Four Loko, Washington and New York sued the manufacturers of Four Loko and said, that's a blackout in a can. I don't understand why people aren't getting fired up about this potency. Hash oils, concentrates, what people use for dabbing, nationwide is pushing 56%. We're pushing 72% in Seattle. So if you plotted us on this chart, we're up here. The y-axis only went up to 14%. When you look at that and what that means, the second thing we have to do is separate out placebo effects from pharmacological effects. Does marijuana do stuff? Yes. Does it do everything people are claiming? Absolutely not. When someone says, well, weed relaxes me, does it? Or is that a placebo effect? When someone says weed makes me more creative, is that a placebo effect? We know we can see and test, and Mandy, you made reference to the videos. We even talk about our bar lab at the University of Washington, where people told they're getting alcohol, but then get placebos, nevertheless act more outgoing, social, flirty, talkative, even though they're not drinking. People who are told they're getting water, but we actually give them booze, don't act any different. But when the effects kick in, they blame it on other stuff. Laughlin and colleagues did a brilliant study where they recruited people that were fans of marijuana and said, we're going to have you be in a study where you may receive an edible, and we're going to take a look at the impact on you. Everyone in their study used marijuana at least once per month, up to multiple times per week. In fact, all but one person in their study used marijuana at least once per week, up to multiple times per day. They told people, we're going to need you to refrain 8 hours before you get here, plan on a variable end, and you're either going to get no THC, low THC, or high THC. And they said, we're going to have you do a bunch of stuff after we give you an edible. They walked in the room, they said, well, you're in the high THC room, and that was some deception. They told people this is a really strong edible, be careful, and proceeded to give them hemp pops. Hemp pops have no active cannabinoids in them. It's hemp seed oil, glucose syrup, citric acid, sugar, natural flavors, and colors number 2 and number 5, which are the 2 most delicious colors. When they handed these out, they had people then finish them, rate their mood, rate how high they felt, do it again at the 30-minute mark, do it again at the 60-minute mark. What they find? There was a statistically significant decrease in negative mood, literally with a lollipop. People said, I was in a horrible mood when I got here. Not anymore. Thanks, researchers. And there was a statistically significant increase in people reporting that they felt high. That's stunning, because what that means is while there are pharmacological effects, there are also dramatic placebo effects. If someone said to me, you only get to show one slide to athletes, student athletes, I would show this. The part of the brain that, among other things, affects attention, concentration, and memory is the hippocampus. Brain imaging shows that after marijuana use, the neurons in the hippocampus get suppressed. What does that mean? They fire, but they fire at a rate that's lower and slower than they could or should be firing. Harrison Pope in the 90s, which much less potent weed than we see now, said, I want to test this with college students. What did he find? A full day after marijuana use, there were decreases in attention, concentration, and memory, and the more heavily someone typically used, the more pronounced those decreases were. Pope showed 2 things that scientists had never shown before. 1, a full day later, we can see the impact of use, and 2, the more heavily someone uses, the more pronounced these are. Critics of this research said, this doesn't prove anything. What if people with attention problems just love weed? And he said, well, we can test that then. Ethically, you can't take people who don't use and make them start, but what if we take people that use every day and have them quit? If as they abstain, their cognitive abilities stay the same, well, maybe they were there to start with. But if as they abstain, their cognitive abilities improve, that's causal. It takes 4 weeks, but 28 days after stopping daily marijuana use, there are no longer any significant differences in attention, concentration, and memory compared to people who don't use. A stunning sample of 15 to 19-year-olds in Southern California in my friend Susan Tapert's lab who didn't even use daily. They used every other day, 14 in the last 30 days. These 15 to 19-year-olds' verbal learning did not match that of people who don't use until 2 weeks of abstinence, verbal working memory 3 weeks, attention takes the full month. Call time out for a second. Think about what that means. If we've got a kid that says, I have ADHD and I'm being treated for it, we can look them in the eye and say marijuana is the worst possible fit for you, because we know of no other substance more associated with causing attention decreases than marijuana. But even realize what a headache this causes for diagnostic purposes and accommodation purposes. If someone says, I have attention problems, can I have Adderall? We can't pretend to diagnose if they do or don't have an attention issue if they are using a substance that causes attention decreases. So for kids that say, I want to get into college, and part of that involves doing well in high school, they need to be mindful of the fact marijuana can absolutely interfere with these issues. I saw, Mandy, a little orange flare-up that a question had come in. So let me stop for a second, see what question there might be. Marijuana, one of the very paradoxical effects of marijuana is that it increases heart rate. It slows down most stuff, but increases heart rate. 29 beats per minute. What is that compared to? Cocaine is 32 beats a minute. So why is that also noteworthy? Hildebrand in 2011 said the use of a marijuana by an elite athlete prior to competition may result in danger to that athlete or others as a result of impairment of response or inappropriate decision-making. I think that becomes noteworthy when we look at Percy Harvin's admission a week ago, Because of decreased exercise performance, possibly secondary to increases in heart rate and blood pressure, which may alter perceived exertion, marijuana may be considered an ergolytic agent. Some student athletes have heard of ergogenic. It's performance enhancement, steroids. What is ergolytic? It means performance impairing. Marijuana does not help. It hurts athletic performance. Gilman and colleagues showed that marijuana use decreased physiological work capacity and reduced maximal exercise duration. What does that mean? A coach says, do this exercise until you tap out and you can't do it anymore. People who use marijuana tap sooner. Kennedy in 2017 looked at 15 published studies that looked at the effects of marijuana and exercise. The number that showed that it helped aerobic performance was none of them. So when you hear people say, I don't know, I feel like it gets me out of my head, I can go farther, longer. Nope, 15 of 15 showed that it had no impact. There was no evidence of increased strength or endurance, could impair abilities in extreme situations, and no data to support claims of analgesic or muscle relaxing properties for athletes, despite some of the things you hear some other high profile athletes saying. This came out in 2018. It showed that when you look at cannabis and the health and performance of elite athletes, it's the memory stuff I talked about, coordination, judgment, and paranoia or psychosis with high doses, the chronic effects, addiction, poor academic performance, altered brain development. You know, if science dictated the legal age, if science dictated a lot of stuff, we may not have legalized. If science dictated the legal age, it would not be 21. It would be 25 at best. Surgeon General just a month ago said there's now enough evidence to say no amount of marijuana is safe for young adults, defined 18 to 25, as well as teens and adolescents. I think that means we have to take a long, hard look at what that means for sales to 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25-year-olds. Chronic bronchitis and increased risk of chronic psychotic disorders. The article I'm almost most excited to show you, this is so new. It just came out. If you're not a researcher, you do not have this Lozano and colleagues article. It looked at anaerobic power measurements and over time, anaerobic fatigue. How they measure that? Maximal power output when you started, minimal power output 30 seconds later. They found more anaerobic fatigue over a 30-second window for the group that used marijuana than those that didn't. This is huge. When you look at, if I had a chance to present to every football team in the country, I would show this to every football team in the country. The group that used marijuana was 64.4% off their peak at the end of 30 seconds. The group that didn't use marijuana was less off their peak. Notice the range is the same band of about 30%. It's not outliers driving this. They also showed that the chronic marijuana use group had participants in higher category for there's the heart issue, for cardiovascular disease. They said not only was there a trend for those using marijuana to show increased fatigability during power testing, in sports where power is important, coaches should encourage their athletes to refrain from using marijuana. When a coach says don't do this stuff, they're not trying to take their students' fun away. They're literally saying the science says you want to do well in the field, stay away from this. So I just want to say a quick word about medical marijuana use, especially because of some of the claims being made by very high-profile people. I had the chance to present in Canada 48 hours before they legalized marijuana for non-medical reasons, and I'd seen these articles or these headlines in the news, so I found the article by Allen and colleagues. Allen and colleagues in Canada said their dream is that this flow chart be in every healthcare provider's office in Canada. If someone say they want medical marijuana, yes. Is it for neuropathic pain, palliative and end-of-life pain, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, or spasticity due to multiple sclerosis and spinal cord injury? If no, then we're done. We're not giving it for depression. We're not giving it for anxiety. We're not giving it for back pain. We're not giving it for headaches. If yes, because what's the key to every medication? You want the benefits to outweigh the side effects or harms. You have to, and the bottom line is there are other treatments that work. If yes, have they first tried traditional therapies and treatments? If no, go back to the drawing board. Only if yes, consider a medical cannabinoid as an adjunct, but people don't smoke their medicine. I show you this because when you look at people that say, well, I want to use marijuana for my anxiety, the claims about CBD all over the place are amazing. This study said we want to take people without a mental health diagnosis because ethically we can't take medication away from people with a diagnosis of something like anxiety, but we're going to, spaced out over time, induce anxiety, make them upset, make them frustrated, and we're going to have them take one of four things. They all signed consent forms and said, I agree to take something. But it was a double-blind experiment. They weren't told what they were getting, and the people bringing it to them didn't even know what it was. You eliminated expectancy. You can see in the abstract, they gave people oral CBD 300 milligrams, 600 milligrams, an unbelievable 900 milligrams, or a placebo. Then induced unwanted affect to see what it showed. What effect did CBD have? Nothing. Oral CBD did not alter responses to emotional stimuli or produce anxiolytic-like, anxiety-reducing-like effects in healthy human subjects. Those of you on this webinar that are counselors, first, bless you for the work you do. And second, meeting with you works. Counseling works. Treatment works. We need to make sure that if someone's struggling with anxiety, they're not turning to something that is being claimed to be effective when there's not the science there to show that it has an impact. And I think there are a lot of people reporting medical marijuana use that might be actually managing addiction. Is marijuana addictive? Yes. There's even withdrawal. Christine Lee asked incoming first-year students, tell us why you use marijuana. And they said stuff like, I like getting high, helps me bond with my friends, gives me something new when I'm bored, makes things more fun, music sounds better, it's cool, and it helps me celebrate. But they also said it helps me relax or sleep, cope when I'm depressed, relieve stress, helps when my appetite sucks, helps me reduce anxiety, helps when I have physical pain, helps when I have a headache. What, my friends, are the criteria for cannabis withdrawal? Well, they include anxiety, sleep problems, appetite problems, depressed mood, and headaches. If you've got a kid that says, I think marijuana helps my depression, how do you know? Well, I use weed every day. And last week I got sick. I couldn't quit coughing, so I called time out on my marijuana use. My depression got terrible. Once my cough improved, I started using weed again and my depression went away. See, it helps my depression. That is not marijuana helping your depression. That is resuming substance use, making your withdrawal symptoms stop. I'll say again, we have effective treatments for depression, anxiety, sleep, headaches, and so on. And counseling works. We want to make sure that when people are struggling, they're going to the right direction. Coaches matter a ton. On college campuses, non-leaders, so kids that aren't wearing a C or an A, who binge drink, perceived among other things that their coach wouldn't care if they did or not. Perceptions of a coach's approval of getting drunk frequently is associated with student athletes' actual reports of getting drunk in the last month. Among 50 African-American female basketball players, factors impacting their use included social and peer influences and rules established by coaches. A study of softball players showed that the more student athletes thought their coach talked about alcohol prevention, the less they drink. The more student athletes thought their coach was lenient about alcohol, the more they drink. That is a stunning finding.
That's huge.
When a coach jokes about partying, when a coach jokes about whatever, that sends a message. When a coach rolls their eyes and says, the school wants me to read these policies, but whatever, that matters. Having that message matters. Trainers even matter. Over 56% of trainers had evaluated, treated, or referred to at least one alcohol-related unintentional injury in a college athlete. And more than 3/4 of trainers who evaluated, treated, or referred to at least one student athlete with an alcohol-related unintentional injury said they knew the athletes had attended practices or contests while hungover. So I even think there's trainings that can be done there. What Pitts and Chow and Yang concluded was that coaches can be trained on strategies and patterns of communication that influence heavy episodic or binge drinking on their teams. So what should coaches be thinking about? What they say about alcohol use does impact their student athletes. Time spent reviewing rules or policies and then enforcing those also takes an impact. It doesn't take a policy violation, conduct issue, or failed drug test to initiate a conversation. It's how you do it. How do you do it? That's why I wanted you to see this link. I emailed the NCAA, Mandy, after you and I talked today, and I said, I want to make sure I hand this out to folks. Because while this was meant for college, this is the one thing you don't need to be a member school to see, and it's available for free. I'd like to draw your attention to modules 4 and 5, communicating with student athletes about alcohol use and problem solving. I even took screenshots to be able to say, instead of saying to a kid, nothing I need to know about, is there? Which is a closed-ended yes-no that says, please say no. Like, what's going on? I want to check in and see how you're doing. Have you thought of trying this? The subtext is, I think you should try this, versus what do you think should help? So it tries to look at what we know works around brief interventions. So that was a lot. And I knew I wanted to, Mandy, you mentioned I have a chance to go right up to the end. If there are questions, I want to address that. But I want to thank the folks that were involved in making this happen and give you my email address at jkilmer@uw.edu. If there's articles that you want to see, I'm super ethical, and due to copyright reasons, you can't send those out on a DL because that violates copyright. But if people say to me, can you please send me this article, per fair use guidelines, that can be done. So with that, I will stop talking
Thank you so much, Jason. Not only do we have an expert in you, but you brought to the table the freshest research, some 2019 research that I think really gave us things to think about. I think if we were to reinforce anything before we got off the webinar today, it would be that coaches really matter. They really make a difference, and how we as adults frame our prevention messages matter. This gets back to families and parents as well. We're bringing up young athletes starting at really young developmental years and bringing them through secondary school and hopefully ushering them into college and post-secondary athletics too. So all the things that we do matter. Part of that is setting messages about non-use and making it comfortable and safe for kids to approach us stigma-free for getting their questions answered as well as seeking help. Thank you so much for your time, Jason. For those of you who are wondering about the videos that I introduced Jason about, the Not a Moment Wasted campaign and the You Can, Marijuana Can't, Not a Moment Wasted, and Jason, jump in if I'm wrong, but I believe Not a Moment Wasted is their college-focused campaign, and that the You Can, Marijuana Can't is our adolescent and teen-focused campaign in Washington State. If you'd like to see or use videos where Jason Kilmer is on and talking about some of the things you heard about today, please see the links in the chat.
Mandy, I can actually say that while it's college focused, it's underage college focused. So there are no, if you do drink, do this. It's 18, 19, 20-year-old focused, so it's appropriate for underage folks.
Here are the sources for the research. We like to give credit where it's due. If you'd like an image from our Gate Equity webinar, we use images that are in the Creative Commons or they're tagged with their individual permissions. As we wrap up today, we encourage you to take a minute to reflect on the webinar and discuss these questions. What were the big ideas for you? What are your next leadership moves? What did you value? What questions are you still wondering about? We're going to sign off now. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your attention.